My father set up a martial arts contest for my hand in marriage. To everyone's shock, my childhood sweetheart, who had always been highly skilled in martial arts, lost to a street beggar. Gasps and mocking laughter erupted like a tide. The esteemed county lord is going to marry a beggar. My elder brother, furious, pointed at my childhood sweetheart. You clearly held back your strength just now. Why did you deliberately lose? Xie Zhaoyang slowly raised his eyes. Xie, am inferior in skill. Losing is losing, there's no such thing as deliberately. When our eyes met, his gaze toward me was cold and distant. In that single look, I knew he had also been reborn. So in this life, Xie Zhaoyang no longer wished to marry me. If that was the case, why should I cling to him any longer? In the next moment, I raised my hand, pointed at the ragged yet straight-backed beggar, and spoke clearly. Since you've won the contest, we shall act as agreed. Come to the Earl's mansion to propose marriage at this time next month. As my words fell, the crowd erupted in an even louder commotion. For a split second, Xie Zhaoyan's face went blank. Shen Qingli, do you know what you're saying? I folded my sleeves gently, my tone calm and unwavering. Of course I do. He let out a laugh as if hearing the most absurd joke, a sneer curling his lips. You're going to marry a beggar just to spite me. I slowly lifted my eyes and looked at the figure on the stage. His long hair was messy, almost covering most of his face. Even in tattered clothes, he couldn't hide his tall, slender figure. In the next second, my voice rang out clearly across the entire venue. A martial arts contest for marriage is about fairness and justice. What's more, the Earl's mansion values its reputation above all else. I paused slightly, meeting Xie Zhaoyan's complicated and unreadable gaze. Since this young master has won the competition, it's only right that I keep my promise and marry him. Where does spite come into play? A soft click sounded. Xie Zhaoyang twirled his wrist, sheathed his sword, and suddenly scowled. Qingli, don't be willful. Father will never agree to such a ridiculous marriage. I was about to speak when my eyes accidentally caught a familiar figure outside the crowd. My illegitimate younger sister, Shen Shuyu, stood gracefully under the corridor. As if passing by chance, but I knew, just like in the previous life, she had only come to confirm whether Xie Zhaoyang had won the contest. Almost simultaneously, Xie Zhaoyang saw her too. The moment their eyes met, the anxiety and anger that had filled his gaze because of me disappeared instantly. It was replaced by an indescribable mix of tenderness and joy. Seeing this, I suddenly understood. So that's why, in a flash, memories of my previous life surged like a tide. Yes, in the previous life. The first thing Xie Zhaoyang did after winning the top martial arts scholar title was to win the martial arts contest my father had set up for me, and marry me in style. At that time, no noble young lady in the capital did not envy me for marrying such an outstanding man. We had a harmonious life after marriage. Admiring flowers in spring, watching snow in winter, he taught me to draw a bow. I ground ink for him. I had thought that such sweet harmony would be enough to keep us together for a lifetime. However, in the third year of our marriage, my half-sister Shen Shuyu, who had grown up with me, committed suicide by poisoning herself overnight, leaving only a letter addressed to Xie Zhaoyang. Every word in the letter was written in blood, filled with repressed love and despair. At that time, after reading it, Xie Zhaoyan's expression remained calm. He simply silently held the letter to the candle and burned it to ashes. Seeing him like that, I didn't think much more about it. Unexpectedly, just a few days later, regardless of the fact that I was about to give birth, he volunteered to lead troops to the distant border. When he returned victorious, 2 years had passed. The baby in the swaddle could already totter around, but the tenderness that had once been in his eyes when he looked at me was gone forever. To be fair, in the subsequent 20 years, Xie Zhaoyang remained an impeccable husband. His official career flourished, and his talents shone brightly. Because of him, I received a noble title at a young age. He never took a concubine, only me and our child lived in the mansion. In the eyes of others, he respected me, protected me, and gave me the dignity of a legal wife. Even I was gradually deceived by this facade. I told myself that no matter how passionate love was in youth, it would always fade into such calm mutual respect in middle age, until he fell seriously ill at the age of 40. In his final moments, an old friend came to visit him, took his hand, and asked if he had any regrets in life. Holding our child's hand, I stood quietly outside the red silk curtain. I heard him whisper, his voice weak but every word clear, revealing the obsession he had hidden for half his life. I shouldn't have run away from her love, and I shouldn't have won that contest. As my thoughts slowly returned, I watched Xie Zhaoyang stride toward Shunshuyu. So in this life, he would rather lose to a beggar in front of everyone than cut off his marriage with me, all to make up for the unresolved regret of his previous life. My heart felt as if it had been pierced by an ice pick. I struggled to maintain a calm expression and announced the result of the contest clearly. The martial arts contest for marriage has a winner. I, Shen Qingli, will keep my promise and marry this young master. As my words fell, my elder brother on the spectators' platform suddenly looked at me, his voice urgent and sharp. Qingli, don't be foolish. He rushed down to the stage in a few steps. You are the legitimate daughter of the Earl's mansion, a county lord personally appointed by the emperor. How can you casually marry a beggar with unknown origins? After speaking, he suddenly turned to Xie Zhaoyang, who had remained silent. His face livid. You grew up with my sister. You even swore in front of everyone back then that you would never marry anyone but her. Today, you didn't do your best and deliberately lost the contest. Are you going to watch her ruin her life out of spite? Upon hearing this, Xie Zhaoyang only raised his eyes faintly. His gaze swept casually over the crowd first, then finally fell on my face, his tone calm to the point of coldness. Uncle Shen will never agree to such a ridiculous marriage. He paused, a faint sneer crossing his lips. Moreover, the county lord's actions are nothing but a momentary impulse. She won't really marry that beggar. As his words fell, the corners of Shenshuyu's lips beside Xie Zhaoyang curled up slightly, a trace of unconcealable complacency flashing in her eyes. Just as my elder brother was about to say something else, Shunshuyu suddenly raised her delicate hand to her forehead and swayed, her body softening and falling backward. Shuyu, Xie Zhaoyan's face changed drastically, his previous composure disappearing without a trace. Amidst the crowd's shocked exclamations, he lifted the pretending to faint Shunshuyu in his arms, and strode away without looking back. I stared at his resolute departing figure, my heart as if clutched by an invisible hand. The crowd dispersed, leaving only a mess around the huge stage. I turned around and truly looked at the man who had remained silent throughout. He was ragged, his hair covering his face, but the line of his jaw was sharp and distinct. I spoke softly. What's your name? Logically, since he had defeated dozens of people in a row, I should have had some impression of him in my previous life. But no matter how hard I searched my memories, I couldn't find the slightest trace of him. The man's dry lips moved slightly, and his voice, though hoarse, was extremely cold. I didn't participate in this contest to marry you. His words stunned me on the spot. He continued in a flat voice, before I came, I heard that Xie Zhaoyang is your childhood sweetheart. I originally planned to defeat him in front of everyone, then give up the right to marry you in exchange for 50 taels of silver. I froze for a moment, the corners of my mouth twitching uncontrollably. So, you're only here for the money? Yes, he replied without hesitation. A surge of inexplicable anger rushed to my heart. I, Shen Qingli, had studied poetry and books since childhood, mastered piano, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Though I didn't dare to say I was the most beautiful woman in the world, I was famous in the capital. The men who wanted to marry me could line up from Zhuqiu Gate to Mingda Gate in Chang'an, and now I was being so disdainfully rejected by a beggar. Competitive spirit and humiliation intertwined and surged within me. I let out a cold laugh, told my maid to bring several silver notes, and threw them directly at his chest. Since you've won the contest, you don't get to choose. These 100 taels buy you the position of my fiancé. Behave yourself. The man lowered his eyes to look at the silver notes scattered on the ground, not moving an inch. Beneath his messy hair, I could barely see his expression. I only heard a very soft sneer. The county lord is buying me. He slowly raised his eyes, through the messy strands of hair. I met a pair of bottomless eyes. There was no greed, no inferiority there, only a silent pool of ink. 100 taels, to buy a beggar as a fiancé. The county lord is truly generous." His hoarse voice held an indescribable tone. Instead of bending down to pick up the silver notes, the man took a step forward. As he approached, a faint scent of cool pine wafted over, completely incompatible with his tattered clothes. He leaned down slightly, bringing his lips close to my ear. His voice lowered to a whisper. "County lord, are you really going to marry someone like me, a beggar with nothing? Of course, you won't regret it, no regrets." The air froze for a moment. The man seemed to let out a soft laugh, then bent down to pick up the silver notes from the ground. As he moved, his tattered sleeve slid down, revealing a lean wrist with a faint old scar. Under my shocked gaze, he folded the silver notes slowly and gently stuffed them back into my hand. "Keep this money, County Lord." Just as I thought he was going to turn around and leave, he said in a low voice, "Wait for me. In half a month, I will definitely come to the Earl's mansion to propose marriage." When I returned to the mansion, an angry shout greeted me. "Unfilial daughter. As the legitimate daughter of the Earl's mansion, you publicly declared that you would marry a beggar. You've humiliated your father completely." Father stood in front of the hall with his hands behind his back, his face livid. Seeing me hanging my head and saying nothing, he suddenly waved his sleeve fiercely and said coldly, "Today, Zhao Yang deliberately lost the contest, making it clear that he doesn't want to marry you. Since that's the case, I will go to the Marquis's mansion tomorrow to finalize the marriage between him and your sister. In the future, I will also find a good husband for you." I raised my eyes and replied with a forced smile, "Very well, Father. Feel free to try. Let's see if your words carry more weight, or the imperial edict of the Empress Dowager." He pointed at me, furious, but suddenly fell silent. He clearly remembered the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet 2 years ago. I had risked my life to block a knife for her. Grateful. The Empress Dowager publicly promised me a wish, vowing to fulfill it for me whenever I needed it. So as long as I refused to back down, the marriage between Xie Zhaoyang and Shen Shuyu would never be possible. Shen Shuyu beside him let out a timely sob, tears rolling down her cheeks, but resentment and unwillingness surged in her eyes. "Sister, since brother Zhaoyang no longer has feelings for you, why do you insist on forcing him and refusing to bless us?" I let out a cold laugh. "Bless you, it's not impossible. My father had always valued profit above all else, in the previous life. The reason he had been happy about my marriage to Xie Zhaoyang was simply because he valued the benefits behind the alliance with the Marquis's mansion. Now that Xie Zhaoyang had abandoned me in public, he was no longer valuable. Given his greedy nature, he might well marry me off to some random person who could bring benefits to the family in exchange for new interests. When it came to my lifelong happiness, it was probably not as valuable in his eyes as a land deed or a favor. Thinking of this, I turned to him and said word by word, "As long as you sign a written agreement, promising never to interfere in my marriage again, in the future, whether I marry a chicken, a dog, or that street beggar, it will have nothing to do with you, unfilial daughter." Father flew into a rage and raised his hand to slap me, but was suddenly held back tightly by Shen Shuyu beside him. "Father, please agree to sister's request," she begged pitifully, her eyes filled with tears. Daughter truly loves brother Zhaoyang. The decision was made in an instant. The scales of profit finally tilted. He compromised. The cold laugh in my heart grew stronger. Yes, it wasn't until I became a mother myself in the previous life that I truly understood. There really are fathers in this world who don't love their own children at all. A few days later, because the Empress Dowager was seriously ill, I entered the palace to visit her. As dusk fell, I walked out of the palace gate, and a familiar figure blocked my way. The scent of sandalwood drifted with the wind. Without looking up, I knew who it was. Qingli. Xie Zhaoyan's voice was deep, with an unmistakable certainty. "You've also come back, haven't you?" I hung my head and stared at the trembling pearl embroidery on the tip of my shoe. Not responding, he took a step forward, casting a shadow over me. "For 20 years of marriage in the previous life, I never treated you unfairly. But since you know Shuyu was the deepest pain in my heart, why do you insist on clinging to this in this life?" I suddenly raised my head, meeting his gloomy gaze, and a sneer curled my lips. "I'm clinging to you, no need to pretend." he said with certainty. You entered the palace today precisely to use the wish the Empress Dowager granted you back then, asking her to bestow a marriage between us, isn't it? I almost laughed out loud. Where do you get such confidence? Xie Zhaoyang stared at me, suddenly reaching out to grab my wrist, his tone urgent. I can promise you I will welcome you into the mansion just like in the previous life. He paused slightly, as if making some kind of decision. But the position of legal wife must be left for Shuyu. This is what I owe her. I suddenly pulled my hand away, the last trace of warmth in my eyes fading completely. I'll say this one last time, whoever you want to marry, who you want as your legal wife, it has nothing to do with me. In this life, I will never marry you again. After speaking, I boarded the Shun family's carriage without looking back. The curtain fell, blocking Xie Zhaoyan's figure as he hesitated to speak. The carriage rumbled forward, I leaned against the soft cushion, and when my fingers touched the corner of my eye, I found them cold and wet. It turned out that some pains, even after being reborn, were still unforgettable. In the previous life, because of Shun Shuyu's death, he insisted on volunteering to go to the border even though he knew I was about to give birth. For more than 1,000 days and nights, I lived alone in the huge Marquis's mansion, swallowing countless sorrows and helplessness. Even on the day I gave birth, when I was half dead, no one was by my side. I could only cling tightly to the quilt. The absurd thing was, I spent half my life managing the Marquis's mansion in order, but all I got was his last words on his deathbed. I shouldn't have won that contest. The wheels rolled over the bluestone road, and the rumbling sound woke me from my memories. I wiped away my tears and slowly sat up straight. Outside the window was the familiar red gate of the Shun mansion, and the maid was waiting on the steps holding a lantern. In this life, there would be no more nights spent awake for Xie Zhaoyang. No more tears shed for him. After the marriage between Xie Zhaoyang and Shun Shuyu was finalized, the two mansions began to prepare frantically. A few days later, Xie Zhaoyang specially came to find me, saying he was going to take Shuyu to Jiangnan for a short stay. Before leaving, he handed me a thick list of dowry items. Shuyu's mother passed away early, just like yours. His tone was flat, but every word felt like a needle. Since you are her elder sister and have experienced marriage yourself, you should take more care of arranging her dowry. Our engagement is hereby terminated. Xie Zhaoyang lingered in Jiangnan with Shun Shuyu for a month before setting off back to the capital. Along the way, misty rain-covered painted bridges, and wind curtains draped over green canopies, all the gentle scenery unique to Jiangnan. One day, watching the rain from the boat, Xie Zhaoyang suddenly remembered that in his previous life, Shen Qingli had also pleaded with him softly, hoping to travel to Jiangnan with him. But at that time, Shuyu had just passed away. He was heartbroken and repeatedly refused on the grounds of being busy with official duties. After that, she never mentioned it again. On the day they set off back to the capital, an inexplicable tightness gripped Xie Zhaoyan's heart. He suddenly wanted to see Shen Qingli immediately. They had been childhood sweethearts for more than 10 years. He had to admit that he still held a deep, irreplaceable affection for her in his heart. Thinking about how he had traveled with Shuyu for this month, leaving her alone in the capital, given her temperament, he wondered how dejected she must have been. As soon as they returned to the capital, Xie Zhaoyang didn't even go back to the Marquis's mansion. He directly rode his horse to the Shun mansion. Unexpectedly, the moment he stepped into the courtyard, he was stunned by the scene before him. Red silk hung high in the hall, with silk fabrics, pearls, jade, and bundles of silk and jade artifacts everywhere. Every item was invaluable. Xie Zhaoyang was first stunned, then the corners of his lips curled slightly. It seemed that Qingli not only admitted her mistake but also prepared such a grand and thorough dowry for Shuyu. He knew this was her way of bowing to him. When Xie Zhaoyang and Shen Shuyu stepped into the mansion, I was sitting upright in the hall, flipping through account books. Qingli, you've gone to great trouble. Xie Zhaoyang took a step forward, his gaze sweeping over the piles of boxes. For the first time, a hint of almost gentle smile appeared in his usual cold eyes. Shen Shuyu beside him, looking at the brilliant glow of the treasures filling the room, couldn't hide her complacency. Brother Zhaoyang, it seems sister really took your words to heart. Xie Zhaoyang curved his lips, not denying it. Shen Shuyu stepped forward eagerly and reached into an open box to take out a jade hairpin. The hairpin glowed brightly in her fingers. Shen Shuyu cherished it, sighing softly. I've never seen such fine ice jadeite except in the palace. With that, she began to wander around the boxes filled with rare treasures, acting as if she were already the mistress here. I closed the account book, stood up slowly, and blocked her path to the next box. Shen Shuyu frowned unhappily, her eyes still wandering over the boxes behind me. Her gaze was filled with greed. I spoke suddenly. These aren't for you. Shen Shuyu's hand froze in midair, her expression turned from complacent to ashamed and angry. Shen Qingli, what do you mean? Exactly what I said. You. Her face flushed instantly, and her voice rose sharply. I knew you had bad intentions. You must have prepared these dowries for yourself. Still wanting to cling to brother Zhaoyang and marry him. Xie Zhaoyang also frowned and stepped forward. Qingli, what on earth do you mean? When he met my gaze, he took a step back instinctively, as if fearing I would cling to him. I've made myself clear. His tone turned cold, with a warning. If you still want to enter the Xie mansion, stop making things difficult for Shuyu. Fulfill your duty as an elder sister and properly arrange her dowry. I met his gaze, my expression calm and my words clear. Xie Zhaoyang, I'll say this one last time, I never wanted to marry you again. As for these, my gaze swept over the boxes in the hall. They're my betrothal gifts, they have nothing to do with you. The air suddenly froze. After a moment of dead silence, Xie Zhaoyang let out a low laugh. Betrothal gifts, Shen Qingli, don't tell me. These things were sent to you by that beggar from the contest. Faced with Xie Zhaoyan's sneering gaze, my fingers curled slightly, and I was lost for words. At dawn yesterday, dozens of strong servants dressed in black had carried these boxes to the Shen mansion. They only said these were the betrothal gifts from their young master, but refused to reveal his name. I had a vague premonition that these betrothal gifts were definitely related to the beggar who won the contest that day. But what was his real identity, to have such generosity? Seeing me lost for words, Xie Zhaoyang thought he had hit the mark. His expression became somewhat arrogant. Qingli, there's a limit to how far you can go to spite me. I suddenly felt bored and turned to leave. Talking to such people was useless. Just then, a servant approached holding a brocade box, saying respectfully, "Second miss, this is the dowry item master specially added for you." Shen Shuyu's face lit up with joy. She opened the brocade box eagerly. When I saw the translucent and smooth suet jade bracelet inside, my blood seemed to freeze instantly. It was the only relic left by my mother. Give it back to me. I rushed forward suddenly, but Shen Shuyu hid behind Xie Zhaoyang like a frightened rabbit, clutching the jade bracelet tightly, her eyes filled with tears. Father gave this to me. Is sister going to snatch it too? I reached out to pull her out, but before my fingers touched her sleeve, Xie Zhaoyang pushed me away. He stood in front of Shen Shuyu, his brows furrowed. It's just a bracelet. Shuyu is your sister too. Is this necessary? I stumbled backward, almost falling. Xie Zhaoyang instinctively reached out to help me, but I had already stabilized myself, taking advantage of his distraction. I grabbed Shen Shuyu from behind him. I took a deep breath, trying my best to suppress the anger in my chest, and held out my hand to her. Give me back the bracelet. Shen Shuyu stared at me, a faint, imperceptible sneer curving her lips. Sister, if you want it so badly. She slowly held out the bracelet. Just as my fingertips were about to touch it, her fingers loosened almost imperceptibly. Crash! The jade bracelet fell straight onto the bluestone floor, shattering into pieces instantly. That crisp sound felt like a knife stabbing into my heart. I stared blankly at the scattered jade fragments on the ground. My mother's face and voice suddenly appeared before my eyes. Towering anger and grief overwhelmed my reason in an instant. I grabbed Shen Shuyu's hair and raised my hand again. That's enough. My wrist was tightly held by a powerful force. Xie Zhaoyan's face was as cold as water, his eyes filled with disappointment and anger. Seeing this, Shen Shuyu took the opportunity to raise her hand and slap me across the face. A burning pain exploded instantly. My ears were buzzing. I instinctively covered my cheek, looking at Xie Zhaoyang in disbelief. Physiological tears welled up in my eyes without warning, blurring my vision. When Xie Zhaoyang saw my red, tear-filled eyes, he suddenly let go of my right hand in panic. His Adam's apple rolled, his voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to." With that, he took a step forward instinctively, reaching out to check my injury. But I pushed him away fiercely. "Get out." He felt humiliated, his expression darkened. The trace of guilt that had just emerged was instantly replaced by displeasure. He returned to his condescending posture. "Qingli, how long are you going to make a scene? Both you and Shuyu will enter the Xie mansion in the future. Do you really want to be so hostile every day? As the elder sister, shouldn't you let your younger sister have her way?" A surge of anger rushed to my heart. I was about to raise my hand to slap him back when a majestic shout suddenly came from behind. "Unfilial daughter, stop this at once." Father was wearing his official robes. Clearly just returning from court, his face was livid as he pointed at me and Shen Shuyu, fighting in broad daylight. "What a disgrace, Shen Qingli. Do you have any dignity as a legitimate daughter left?" I suddenly turned around, my red eyes staring straight at him. The grievances and resentment accumulated over the years erupted completely at this moment. "Dignity? What about you? How dare you casually give my mother's only relic to the child born to your concubine?" I pointed at the shattered jade bracelet on the ground, my voice trembling with extreme anger. "Embezzling your late wife's dowry to fill your illegitimate daughter's private treasury. What kind of head of the family are you? What kind of man?" As my words fell, Xie Zhaoyang beside me froze. He whispered almost inaudibly, "This is your mother's relic." I ignored him, looking at my father with hatred. "If you dare to touch my mother's relics again, I don't mind taking you to court." "Unfilial daughter, shut up." As if his sore spot had been touched, he flew into a rage and raised his hand to slap me. I closed my eyes, preparing to endure the blow. However, the expected pain never came. I opened my eyes in shock, only to see a tall, pine-like figure standing in front of me. The man slowly turned around. When I saw his deep eyes and cold features, my pupils contracted sharply. I whispered in disbelief, "It's you." The man raised his eyebrows slightly at me. "Didn't Miss Shen give me 100 taels to marry you? I'm here to keep my promise." "Ridiculous." Xie Zhaoyang suddenly pulled me behind him, stepping forward to block the man and me. "You're that beggar from the contest. Do you know what nonsense you're talking about? Do you really think you can marry the legitimate daughter of the Earl's mansion?" Before he could finish speaking, a dull thud sounded from the side. My father's face turned as pale as paper. He suddenly knelt straight on the ground, his voice trembling uncontrollably. Your servant pays homage to His Royal Highness the Crown Prince." "What? Crown Prince?" Xie Zhaoyang stiffened all over, suddenly remembering something. He turned sharply to look at the imposing man beside him, his voice changed with shock. "Why, you're the fourth Prince, Song Sui, who was just appointed Crown Prince by His Majesty." Song Sui neither confirmed nor denied it, only raising his eyebrows slightly. Behind the half-mountain, Xie Zhaoyang took a deep breath, all the color drained from his face. Finally, he knelt down on one knee, his voice hoarse. "Your servant pays homage to His Royal Highness the Crown Prince." Song Sui ignored them both. Instead, he walked straight up to me, his slender fingers gently lifting my chin. My heart tightened. I tried to dodge instinctively, but was held in place by the undeniable strength of his fingertips. When his thumb touched my swollen, burning cheek, I hissed softly in pain. Song Sui's eyes narrowed, the gentle aura around him suddenly turned cold and hard. "Next time someone bullies you, repay them twice as hard. Do you understand?" Why did these words sound so familiar? I stared at him blankly, a complex emotion surged in my chest: satisfaction, confusion, and an indescribable shock. As soon as Song Sui's gaze swept over, several black-armored guards appeared like ghosts. Without a word, they lifted Shen Shuyu up and pressed her firmly to her knees. No, father, brother Zhaoyang, save me." Loud slaps mixed with Shen Shuyu's cries echoed repeatedly in the silent courtyard. Xie Zhaoyang suddenly tried to stand up, but was firmly held down by his father, whose face had turned ashen. He couldn't move. It was only when I entered the palace to visit the Empress Dowager a few days ago that I learned the truth. It turned out that Song Sui was the son of a deceased palace maid. During the emperor's serious illness, he had left the palace on a secret edict, but was ambushed by assassins sent by his brothers. Seriously injured, he had to disguise himself as a beggar to hide his identity and wander among the people. The Empress Dowager lay on her imperial couch, gently holding my hand. This child's life in the palace in the past was more difficult than you can imagine. I can tell he has put his heart into you, otherwise, he wouldn't have risked exposing his identity to win that martial arts contest for marriage. Suddenly remembering something, a gentle smile appeared on her lips. Oh, right. I just remembered you two met once when you were children. The Empress Dowager's words were like a key, suddenly unlocking sealed memories. I suddenly recalled that when I was a child, I had accompanied my mother to the palace to visit the Empress. Under the plum tree in the imperial garden, I had happened to see a group of children in rich clothes bullying a thin boy. They forced him to kneel by the frozen pool and threw stones at him. At that time, my mother was still alive. I was cherished in her palms, spoiled to be willful and arrogant. Seeing this, I imitated the chivalrous heroes in storybooks, fought with the group of children, and finally drove them away. Then I took off my newly acquired crimson cloak and wrapped it tightly around the boy, whose lips had turned purple from the cold. Next time someone bullies you, repay them twice as hard. Do you understand? My chest suddenly throbbed, making me feel a little numb. So that little boy was Song Sui, therefore. The reason he had appeared on the stage that day was not for the 50 taels of silver as he had claimed, it was for me. The Empress Dowager's casual sigh let me catch a glimpse of another side of that storm. No wonder the court had been turbulent recently, and even my always smooth-tongued father had been trembling with fear all day long. It turned out that the third prince and the fifth prince had completely fallen out over the crown prince's position, and finally both suffered defeats. After the emperor recovered, he thought he could no longer leave the crown prince's position vacant, as it would destabilize the court. In the end, he made Song Sui the crown prince. A garwood burned quietly in the gilded incense burner, curling into thin smoke. The Empress Dowager stroked her teacup, her gaze sweeping over my face as if casually. They say when the snipe and the clam fight, the fisherman profits. If no one throws a stone into the calm water of this imperial city at the right time, how can there be ripples enough to stir up the current situation? She smiled faintly, her eyes showing understanding of everything. I knew this child is the most like his father in his bones. My heart skipped a beat. I suddenly understood. There was no such thing as fate or coincidence. The real mastermind behind the struggle that completely brought down the two princes was probably Song Sui, who seemed to be indifferent to world affairs. But these things were not for me to inquire about. I could only lower my eyes, pretending not to understand the hidden meaning in her words, and found an excuse to take my leave in a hurry. When I reached the palace gate, I looked up and saw a familiar figure standing quietly beside the carriage. Song Sui stood with his hands behind his back, as if he had long expected me to appear at this moment. He looked at me, a faint smile on his lips, and held out his hand. "I'll take you home." I lowered my eyes to look at his slender, well-jointed hand. I clearly knew that the person in front of me was far from as gentle as he appeared. He was even dangerous, but I still placed my hand in his palm as if possessed. When our palms touched, he interlaced his fingers with mine. Just as I had imagined, broad and warm. I suddenly wasn't afraid anymore. At least at this moment, I believed that the man in front of me would never hurt me. At the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet, all officials attended with their families. As an illegitimate daughter, Shunshuyu was not qualified to attend. But she was given a special invitation because she was Xie Zhaoyan's fiancé. The music paused, and it was the turn of the younger generation to perform. Shunshuyu stood up first, wearing a luxurious neon dress. She bowed respectfully to the Empress Dowager. "Your servant girl wishes to perform a dance to celebrate your Majesty's birthday." Her gaze swept over Xie Zhaoyang, full of confident pride. However, shortly after she started dancing, perhaps because she was too anxious, she stumbled on an otherwise graceful spinning step. Although she tried her best to cover it up, it drew a few suppressed laughs from the guests. She immediately lost her composure. The rest of her dance was completely disorganized. After hastily finishing, she returned to her seat with a pale face. When it was my turn to perform, Shen Shuyu's resentful gaze never left me. The dance I performed for the Empress Dowager was called Jinghong, startled swan, as my silk sleeves fluttered. The entire hall fell silent. Just as I was about to spin around, Shen Shuyu, sitting among the guests, suddenly raised her hand and quietly snapped the pearl necklace around her neck. Round pearls rolled onto the ground instantly. When the tip of my foot touched the smooth pearls, my body suddenly slipped. Our eyes met. Shen Shuyu curled her lips in triumph. In the blink of the series of responses flowed like clouds and water, as if they were naturally part of the dance. The hall fell into silence for a moment, then erupted into thunderous applause. Shen Shuyu's smug expression had not yet faded when she froze in place. To avoid raising suspicion, she quickly knelt on the ground, her voice trembling. Your servant daughter deserves death 10,000 times over. This necklace suddenly broke for some reason, disturbing the Empress Dowager's birthday banquet. Please forgive me, Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager lowered her eyes to glance at her. Her gaze as calm as an ancient well, showing neither reprimand nor command to rise. She then clapped her hands and laughed lightly at me. The fine lines at the corners of her eyes filled with admiration. Well done. Remaining calm under pressure truly reveals one's true character. I lowered my head, smiling bashfully. A court official seated next to me, who had always been at odds with my father, stroked his beard and chuckled softly, his voice low yet clear enough for those around him to hear. Lord Shen, the two young ladies from your household are truly like a jade moon in the sky and a world apart from the dust and mud. All the guests at the banquet were seasoned courtiers. How could anyone fail to notice the peculiar break in the pearl? The Empress Dowager's attitude spoke volumes. By not explicitly pointing it out, she had already shown the utmost dignity, yet it was also the greatest humiliation. Father's face turned instantly ashen, yet he could not refute it, only forcing an awkward smile. Beside me, Xie Zhaoyang seemed to pay no attention to everything that had happened. He held a wine glass in his hand, his gaze firmly locked onto me. About halfway through the banquet, I went alone to the back garden for some fresh air. The night wind was slightly cool, but it couldn't dispel the stagnation in my heart. I heard familiar footsteps behind me. Xie Zhaoyan's voice sounded particularly deep under the moonlight. You performed quite well just now. I didn't turn back, my voice calm and unruffled. Thank you, young master. He was silent for a moment, then withdrew a familiar bamboo flute from his sleeve. That was a gift I had made for him with my own hands on his birthday last year. His tone carried a hint of inquiry. Qingli, could you dance for me one more time, just like before? Impossible. Those 3 words rang out with tremendous force. Xie Zhaoyan's face gradually turned pale, yet hope still lingered in his expression. I don't believe you have no feelings for me at all. He took a step forward, his voice filled with panic. Qingli, if I told you that the one I've always liked in my heart has been you, would you believe me? I only feel guilty towards Shu Yu. Afraid that she might still do something foolish in this life, so I wanted to temporarily take her into my household. But now I understand that this only pushes you further and further away. Bloodshot eyes filled with regret. I'm sorry, can't you just not marry the crown prince? Let's stay together for a lifetime like we did in our last life. Okay, I felt like I had heard the greatest joke in the world. Spend a lifetime together. I violently shook off Xie Zhaoyan's hand as he tried to grasp mine, my chest heaving violently. Although I had tried my best to calm my emotions, my voice still carried an uncontrollable catch. Last lifetime, you kept saying you felt guilty toward Shen Shuyu, but had you ever considered how much more guilty you were to your wife and children? Do you know how incredibly difficult it was for me to raise Nyana alone after you abandoned us and rushed off to the frontier? When he caught a cold and had a high fever that wouldn't go down, he kept crying out for daddy in his sleep. That child never understood until the very end why his father had never wanted to look at him even once since his birth. Tears blurred my vision as I stared into his suddenly pale face. Xie Zhaoyang, you are a complete scoundrel. You're always chasing after what you can't have, never learning to cherish those who are right in front of you. Having loved you, I was simply blind. As the words fell silent, Xie Zhaoyang was struck as if by lightning. After staggering forward, he collapsed to the ground with vacant eyes, as if all his strength had been drained from his body. A familiar gentle call came from afar. Qingli. Song Sui stood with a lamp in hand, his dark-colored cape fluttering lightly in the wind. I walked toward him without hesitation, never once looking back at the person behind me. The day I got married, I wore the phoenix crown and red wedding dress. With joyous red decorations filling the hall, the maid was helping me prepare to leave when suddenly a commotion erupted outside the door. Xie Zhaoyang in full military uniform burst into the room, his armor still damp with morning dew. I instinctively took a half-step back, watching him with caution. "What are you doing?" He simply stood in place, his gaze greedily lingering on my wedding dress, his eyes bloodshot. "Qingli." His voice was hoarse. "You look as beautiful in your wedding dress as you did before." He smiled bitterly, a glimmer of tears flashing at the corner of his eyes. "Unfortunately, this time I'm not the groom." Seeing that I remained on guard, he took a deep breath and slowly stepped back half a step, creating distance between us. "I'm sorry." Those 3 words seemed to have used up all his strength. "For my former arrogance, for the pain I've caused you, for everything." His gaze swept across my eyebrows and eyes one last time, as if trying to engrave this moment in his heart. "May you henceforth be safe and happy, with children by your side." Having said that, he turned decisively, his armor clanking gradually disappearing into the celebratory gongs and drums. I watched that staggering figure depart, and suddenly recalled my previous life. It was also such a red candlelit night. He held the wedding scale gently, carefully lifting my dragon dove veil. The flickering candlelight danced in his eyes filled with smiles as he said, "Qingli, I, Xie Zhaoyang, vow that I will never betray you in this life." That sincerity in his eyes at that time, contrasted with the desolation as he departed now, wove together beneath the red silk draperies that adorned the hall, forming a dream spanning lifetimes. Just as in his previous life, Xie Zhaoyang volunteered to lead troops and garrison the frontier, never to return to the capital. Shen Shuyu was unwilling to live a hardship-filled life with him in the frontier, thus she terminated her engagement with him. Her father arranged another marriage for her, with the second young master of the Zhangguo Gong family, but given Shen Shuyu's status as an illegitimate daughter, she could only become a concubine. She heard that the principal wife was quite formidable in her methods. After Shen Shuyu entered the household, she was tormented daily and within a month was crying out to her father to have her taken back to the family estate. Though her father had once shown favoritism toward her, when faced with real interests, he ultimately chose to stand by idly, leaving her to fend for herself in the vast compound. Time passed, and dynastic changes occurred. The once Grand Count's mansion gradually fell into decline. Later, her father was stripped of his title for being involved in a corruption case related to grain transport. That day snow was falling heavily, and he staggered to his knees on the long steps in front of the Eastern Palace, his white hair covered with frost. The palace attendants held umbrellas to shield me from the snow, and whispered that he had been kneeling in the snow for 3 hours. I stood in the corridor, looking at that figure huddled in the wind and snow. I remembered how he had insisted on bringing his concubine back to the mansion even when his mother was lying ill in bed. How she casually gave away her belongings to her illegitimate daughter, how she watched coldly from the sidelines during my most difficult times. Finally, I left the 2 characters not seen behind and walked away without looking back. After my marriage to Song Sui, we supported each other and shared deep affection. After he ascended the throne, he left all 6 palaces empty, with only me by his side. Many years later, on a snowy night, the candlelight flickered as he finished reviewing the last memorial. Suddenly, he gently took my hand. "Qingli." His voice was deep. In fact, in my previous life, I had also once stood beneath the pavilion. My fingertips trembled slightly as I looked at him in disbelief, but back then I was too weak. "I could only watch as you received your imperial crown and bridal dress, watching you shed tears alone within the deep courtyard." His palm was warm, gently enveloping my cool fingers. "So in this lifetime, I swear I will definitely make you happy." I looked into his still bright eyes, smiling as I squeezed his hand back. "You have succeeded, Snow fell silently outside the window, while inside the palace, time passed peacefully. In this lifetime, we ultimately did not disappoint each other.